Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for another Discover Wildlife evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Dan Free, and I'm the General Manager here at Wildlife Worldwide and the Travelling Naturalist. Now, this evening, we're going to be hearing from the superb Bret Charman about bear watching in both Slovenia and Finland, a couple of destinations that Bret knows very well and he's raved about for as long as I can remember, quite frankly. So much so that he actually persuaded my wife and I to travel there. We went to Slovenia last year, and I think Finland the year before that, and I have to admit, his recommendation was spot on. We had a fabulous time. We self-drove between the bear lodges, and it was a brilliant trip, some superb sightings, and it's worth just keeping in mind when we view Bret's presentation tonight that is an option for both countries. We're going to be focusing on the group trips tonight, but self-drive is also a possibility. Now, as ever, there will be some questions at the end of Bret's talk. So if you have anything in mind, please either post it on the chat or in the Q&A section. We will also have a poll at the end of this evening, just listing the various trips that we've covered tonight. And so if any of those are of interest, just let us know and we can send you the detailed itineraries. I think that's about all I need to say. So on that note, I'm going to pass you over to Mr. Charman.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Cheers, Bret. Have a good one.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Hopefully, I'm here to inspire you to see Europe's bears. So I'm going to sort of split it into two, really. So we've got the first section where I'll be focusing on Slovenia, and then the second section where I'll move on to Finland. They're slightly different sort of experiences, I suppose, and the expectations, I guess, are a little bit different as well. So hopefully I can give you a better idea of what's on offer, what the accommodation's like, how to get there, etc. So we'll start off with Slovenia. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Slovenia or know much about Slovenia, but it's a beautiful country. It's nestled in between 4 other countries, so Austria, Italy, Croatia, and Hungary. And it's a country that's sort of primarily mountainous, or at least hilly, and it's got a tiny little bit of coast, as you can see on the Adriatic sort of coast between Italy and Croatia. And it's just one of my favorite countries in the world, to be honest. I've been privileged to travel all over the place, but Slovenia is somewhere I keep going back to. I go there on holiday as well as leading tours for work. So we fly into Ljubljana. That's usually on an EasyJet flight, typically, and it takes about 2.5 hours from the UK, direct flight. There's several different airports you can fly from, so we always try and make sure we get you the best flights possible. And then when we arrive in Ljubljana, we get met by the team from the bear watching company, Slovenia Bear Watching. And what we do is we drive in a minibus usually, and maybe a four-wheel drive as well. And we drive down to the guest house Mlaka, which is in a little village called Markovic. It's almost due south of Ljubljana, and it's about a 45-minute to an hour drive through some pretty beautiful scenery. So to start off, it's just along the motorway, and then we start to wind our way through the mountains and the hills in the southern half of Slovenia, in the Dinaric Alps. So to the north, you've got the Julian Alps, which border sort of Italy and Austria. And then to the south, you've got the Dinaric Alps, which are noticeably less rugged. So in the picture you can see here, there are some big snow-capped peaks at the back. They are the Julian Alps, and these forested sort of lower mountains in the foreground, that's the Dinaric Alps. And they're famed as a karst limestone landscape. It's where the word karst comes from. And it is one of the best caving locations in the world, and it's home to some sort of very famous karst features. So you normally arrive, we take typically a late morning flight or a morning flight, and we arrive just after lunch. We will then drive the 45 minutes to an hour to the guest house. We'll get you all settled in your rooms. This is the guest house Mlaka. And it's a family-owned guest house, and they also run the bear watching business. So it works brilliantly for us and for them too, because we can make sure that you get the best experiences, the smoothest transfers, all of those sorts of things. So it's a really great way to do it. and it's a really lovely traditional Slovenian guest house. It's been going in the family for generations, and it provides literally the perfect accommodation for what we're after. It's comfortable. It grows its own salads and things like that. So a lot of the food is local, which is fantastic. And it's just nestled in a really beautiful valley with meadows all around it. And you can see wildlife in the garden, all sorts of different birds nesting, quite often redstarts in the garden. And then there can even be pine martens visiting in the evening, roe deer, you name it, all sorts of things are around. So you never quite know what you're going to expect. There have even been seen, we have even seen bears in the meadow next door. So they really can be anything around at any time. And it's a great base for our stay. So as you can see, the rooms are very comfortable, typically en suite. In the guest house itself, they're all en suite, I believe. Some have a balcony, views over a meadow at the front as well. The ones at the back have views over sort of the start of the forest. It's a great location. I usually stay either in the basement or in a building nearby, in a really nice sort of little guide quarters, sorry. But it's a fantastic base for a short stay. So normally our group photography tour is 6 days, so 5 nights. But if you want to do a tailor-made, then obviously we can tailor that to suit. So upon arrival, get settled in your rooms. It's really easy just to go for a gentle stroll if you want to along the lanes. They're really quiet, so it's easy to walk. It's very safe. You can't really get lost either. And then you come back for our first dinner. And I have to warn you, if you ever go to Slovenia and stay with Miha, who's our local guide, you will be fed very, very well. The portion sizes are enormous, and you normally get many courses as well. And there is also a bar in-house as well. So you'll be very well looked after before you even get to the wildlife. So the landscape itself, I think, is really important here. And as I said, it's home to the karst limestone landscape in particular. This is actually one of the karst limestone features, although it might not look like it. This is an intermittent lake called Lake Segnica. And it's actually quite unusual in the fact that it can completely disappear. So in the winter, it's frozen over. It fills up with frost, with with thaw water. So melt water comes down and it fills up. It goes through the rock, percolates, and then eventually the lake fills up. By midsummer to late summer, the water level drops almost completely, and it becomes a completely different habitat. It's farmed, it's grazed, etc. And it's a really beautiful place. And you can see pike in the water, huge numbers of different birds utilize it. Red-footed falcons are around, corncrake around the edges of the lake in the meadows, wildflowers galore. It really is stunning. And as you can see, the whole area, all the hillsides are covered in forests. It's only these valleys and a few glades in between the forest where you get sort of open meadows and farmland. And it's really important to say as well that the farmland is done on a subsistence local basis. So it's strip farming, and it is always rotated each year, which is fantastic. So some amazing cave systems. And actually one of the great things about this trip is if you want to, there is the opportunity to explore a local cave called Krishna Jama, which literally means cross cave. And this cave is a really fantastic place for all sorts of reasons. But it's obviously got amazing limestone formations, but it's also full of cave bear fossils, which is really, really special. So you can actually see a cave bear skull when you walk in. There's some sites of cave bears. There's also a few endemic species that are found only in this cave, nowhere else. They're pretty small, not the most photographic subject, but nonetheless pretty fascinating. And you can see quite a few different species of bat as well, particularly if you go earlier in the season, because lots of them are still hibernating along the roof of the cave. So if that's something that interests you, it's a really great opportunity, and the formations there are really, really spectacular. As I said, there is other bird life around as well. So usually what happens is in the mornings, the bears aren't particularly active. So what we do is if you want to go into the hides, we absolutely can. That is entirely possible. But typically there are other things around to photograph, such as urals. We can go and visit the white stork nest, this one, which is in a village about 5 minutes drive away. And usually during the month of May when we go, they've got chicks and they're feeding them. So you can see the adults come back, clatter their bills and mating rituals, bonding rituals. And it's a fantastic sight to see. But probably an even bigger draw than that is what's in the forests. So you get these glades, and then around the forest are some of the best habitats in Europe for the Ural owl. So what we normally do is we go along tracks such as this, and then we go looking for a Ural owl. They are one of the most magical owl species I've ever seen. There's no denying it. They're a big species of owl as well. Surprisingly big, I think, the first time you see them. Completely silent as they fly through the forest, but can be quite approachable at times. They're quite happy to perch up in trees and they'll watch you. And the Dinaric Alps around the lodge is actually home to the highest density of Ural owls in Europe. So it's one of the most reliable places to see these spectacular birds. So as well as bears, there's so much more on offer. And you can be sure, no matter what your interests, you're always going to get to see something. So the main reason you're coming here, obviously, is for the bears. And I think it's really important to let people know that bear watching in Europe is not like bear watching in Canada or Alaska. So you can't go and sit alongside a river and watch bears fishing. It just doesn't happen. Unfortunately, bears in Europe have been hunted mercilessly for hundreds and hundreds of years. And actually that was the case, well, thousands of years even. And that was the case in Slovenia. And it still happens in parts of Slovenia. And it still happens in areas, pockets around where we photograph too. But what's really important to say is that by going on a photography tour to photograph bears in Slovenia, you're actively encouraging the local people to protect the population, because they benefit not only from direct business in the fact that the local communities are the ones that own the forests, so they get payments for you to visit, but also it has a wider reach. If the accommodation at Mihal's is full, he will outsource rooms to other people, local guest houses and things like that. So it's a community benefit from photography. So we photograph the bears from purpose-built hides, and you might see that there are some drain pipes sticking out of the hides on one side. And what this is actually to draw your scent up into the trees. It goes into the canopy and then the wind takes it away. So it doesn't disturb the bears. Some hides have specialist low angle photography points. Most of them typically are at head height. It's really important as well to say that if you're not a hardcore photographer, it really doesn't matter. You can take some fantastic photographs on bridge cameras, sort of point and shoots, even your iPhone. You can really take stuff. Of course, lots of people now use high-end mirrorless and SLRs, and they're great, and their sort of low light capabilities and stuff like that all helps, and their focus systems. But you can still take great shots, and just to watch bears in the wild in Europe is really, really spectacular. So typically we drive to within the hides. Some hides are very close to where we can park. Some can be up to sort of a half-a-mile walk, sometimes over quite uneven ground. Some are much more accessible. So it really depends on your level of fitness and your ability as to what hides you can go in. And we'll always try and cater accordingly. Typically, the hides take 2 to 3 people. They're quite spaced out. So normally what we'd do is we'd put people in hides if they're in as a couple as such, or if you'd like to join me in a session and I can help you with your photography, or if you have any questions about the bears or the wildlife, please do ask, and we'll always make sure that I can spend some time with you. That's absolutely fine. So typically what happens is food is put out for the bears. That's really important to state as well. But it is done under strict legislation by the Slovenian government. So not everybody can do it. And they are only fed corn, and that is so that they don't become reliant on the food source. So they have to go out and look for a whole variety of other food sources. So they need to get their high protein fix, their sugars and things like that from berries, from insects, mammals if they can get carrion, even bear. They'll even hunt deer occasionally, very rarely, but it is known to happen. So they have to go out and source their own food, and they'll dig up tubers and things like that as well. And the corn is literally just a supplementary item to their diet. So that's really important to say. And we will basically position the corn to get the bears to move into the best photographic spots. If you're not interested in photography, that doesn't matter. You'll still get fantastic sightings. So these are sort of the typical hides you can see, and they have portholes for your cameras so that you don't have to photograph through glass. That's really important if that's what you want. But there are viewing panes as well. So if you've got binoculars, bring them, because you can see an amazing number of woodpeckers, including black woodpecker. There's jays, there's red foxes, sometimes even badgers have been known to come through. Some people are really lucky and see beech marten, but more typically, it is the bears, fox, maybe even a Ural owl, and cuckoos galore. Particularly in May, the whole forest is ringing with the sound of cuckoos. It's really quite spectacular. But of course, it's these guys that we're here for. It's the bears. And to see your first bear in Europe is a magical experience. This wasn't my first bear in Europe, but this was my very first bear in Slovenia on my first night in one of the hides. And as you can see, the forest here is beech forest, a lot like the Downs in Hampshire around where our office is. And these forests are fantastic for photography because they've got such depth to them. And it's so nice to photograph bears in a rich sort of natural habitat, but also a deciduous forest, not a coniferous. And for me, that's something really, really alluring when I first heard about Slovenia. And I went there and I was blown away. And I was amazed at the photographic opportunities. And it can be challenging, but typically what I say is you don't need a big telephoto lens. So most of these photographs you'll see today in Slovenia, it's important to note, are with a 300mm lens, but a 70 to 200, a 100 to 400, even wide angles, you can get some absolutely amazing photographs. So that's really important to note. But as you can see, the light's always changing, and the hides have been designed to try and maximize side lighting, some backlighting as well, and the background is taken into consideration. So there's a lot of factors that have gone into designing the hides, and they are placed in beautiful bits of forest. Some of it's old growth, some of it's more recent, but there's a real variety. Some have these beautiful cast limestone outcrops, such as in this image, and the light's always changing. The reason we go in May is because the bears have woken up in the spring. So to give you an idea, there's usually still snow in April. I spoke to Mihar today, the guy that owns the business, and they've got a foot of snow at the moment in the Dinaric Alps. So it's very much still winter there. The bears are hibernating. And in May, it's trying to get as many calories as possible. So by putting the food out, we bring the bears in, just supplementing their diet whilst they're going out foraging for other things. So it means that we see a wide range. So earlier in the year, it's primarily adults and sub-adults. So last year's young, maybe individuals that are a couple of years old. And then as the year goes on, you're more likely to see mothers and cubs because they come out of the sort of the more remote forests, and then they're looking for more food. And you see larger males as well because they're looking for the females. So there really are loads of opportunities. So this is a sub-adult. You can see he's actually just losing his winter coat. So he's a bit scruffy on one side. And this is up on top of a sort of a grassy plain, a bit like a bluebell wood, I suppose we'd get in the UK. But for me, it's all about, I love the cast limestone and these amazing rocky boulders which have been worn smooth by the rain, by the roots as well of the trees. They shape themselves around the rocks. And you can see a whole host of different individuals as they explore looking for food, including the natural food, but they'll also eat the berries and things around as well. And they will also even try and eat the beech nuts from the trees. So that's another important food source for them. In case you're wondering about how they behave around people, they are very skittish. So there are between 800 and 1,000 bears in sort of the Dinaric Alps region. Most of them, if they see a person, will run, absolutely. So when you're in the hide, we ask you to speak at a whisper, don't talk any louder. Try and put your camera to quiet mode if you have one. If you don't, and you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You can always ask me if you come on a trip with me, or ask Mihar if you go independently. And there is countless photographic opportunities. And if you just stay quiet, the bears are very relaxed. As you can see from this image, they're really not stressed at all. And what you might be able to see is there's a lot of variety between different bears. So some are much darker, some are more chestnut colored. This one's got a golden head. So there really is loads on offer, and you can sometimes see them interacting as well. Sometimes you see last year's young meeting their mother, having just left them. So sort of 2-year-olds, sorry, have just sort of been separated from their mother. And you see their interaction between them. They don't ever fight, there's no aggression, so please don't worry about that. The food isn't sort of that, they're not dependent on it, as I said, so that isn't ever an issue. They'll just move away if there's an issue. But you can also get sometimes the cubs slightly later in the year, particularly if you're doing tailor-made, and they'll come and play in the rocks and things like that. So there's loads and loads of photographic opportunities, and the light's always changing. So what we typically do is we go mid-afternoon, so we go after lunch, probably have about an hour between lunch and when we head out. And what I would say about bear watching in Slovenia is it's a bit more easygoing. So it's not all-nighters and hides, which we'll find out about a bit later on. It's a few hours, 4 hours in a hide for an evening or a morning if you want to. Typically 3 hours is enough. And to warn you, the weather can be quite changeable. So it can be very warm in the summer, but in May, it can be very warm in the day and quite cool at night and in the mornings. There can be showers, there can even be snowstorms. So you never really know what's going to happen. In July, it's very hot. We don't really recommend it. August and September and beginning of October is a great time to go as well. So May into June, August, September, October, brilliant times to go. If you go later in the year, as I said, you're more likely to get cubs like this one, and you get slightly different lighting and different colors as well. But May is, for me, is my favorite time because all of the bird life is out in force, particularly the Ural Owls. That's the best time to go. And you can expect to build up a whole portfolio of imagery, hopefully in a week. But if not, you just have to go back, because I go back every year and I haven't got fed up of it, and I don't think I ever will. So as you can see, all of these images were taken with a 300mm lens. So you can get a whole range of shots from environmental to sort of nice portraits, and you're really not struggling. And there's beautiful lush vegetation everywhere, and it's really beautiful. If you go later in the year, the colors start to change, and obviously the beech trees start to go beautiful autumnal hues, much more yellow, and there's slightly less vegetation around as well. So that's important to note. But you know, it's an amazing experience, but that isn't all there is to Slovenia either. So if you're joining the group tour, or if you decide to do it on a self-drive basis, after you've done the bears, so the group tour, we spend the 6 days there, 5 nights, you can always extend it. And with our self-drive, we recommend you do a few days with the bears, and then you go north to, well, maybe you could do a little city break in Ljubljana, then you could go up to the Julian Alps, and you can go to Lake Bled and places like that, which are absolutely beautiful. So Lake Bled is one of the most beautiful places I know. I should just say, actually, that the previous image and this image have been sent to me, have been given to me, I suppose, by Dan's wife, Danny Free, after their trip last year. So these are the shots that you can get slightly later in the year. But as you can see, Lake Bled is one of the most picturesque places on the planet, really. The people are wonderful, the food's fantastic, the hotels are great, the mountains around are spectacular. And if you are slightly more adventurous, there are some amazing tracks up through the forest you can explore, and you can see a whole host of different species on these mountains. So there are black grouse, capercaillie, chamois, ibex, marmots. There really is all the high altitude stuff that you would expect with the alpine climate. So Slovenia has so much going for it, and I think if you went back every year, you'd find somewhere new. And I think Dan and I both agree that we could quite happily move there tomorrow if the option presented itself to us, and we could go and explore these amazing places on a daily basis. It would just be heavenly. It really is the perfect wildlife escape, and it's so close to the UK, so you really can't ask for more. So now I'm going to take you to Finland, and Finland is quite a different proposition, but with primarily the same subject. So obviously brown bear is our primary focus usually in Finland. So it's important to say that we fly from London, or if we can regionally, to Helsinki Airport. Typically it's London with the way the flights work. And then we normally have a couple of hours in Helsinki, just in the airport, so we can grab some lunch. It's normally a morning flight again. And then what we do is when we're in Helsinki is we'll fly to the closest airport we can to the choice of lodge you're going to. Typically, they like to change their flight schedules quite a lot. So it makes life a bit more challenging, but we like a challenge. So typically, we either fly to Oulu, which you can see on the sort of central western coast. There's a red dot with Oulu, which is a coastal city, or Kahani, which is on a lake, which is a town. And those are typically the two places we go to. We fly in there. If you're from Oulu to either Martin Selkonen, Boreal Wildlife Centre, or Quika Base Camp, it's from Oulu is about a 4-hour drive. But it's beautiful forest the whole way, quiet roads, beautiful roads as well, perfectly kept. And if it's from Kahani, it's typically 2 hours, something like that. So it sounds, some people are sort of put off by the journey, but I promise you it's worth it. Don't ever worry about that. And if you go from Kahani, you actually go along the lake for most of the journey, and it's absolutely breathtaking. You can see all sorts of things along the way, black kites galore, common cranes, even forest reindeer you can see if you're really lucky in some of the meadows, and you just never know, even elk if you're really lucky. So what happens is we normally get to those places in the afternoon, and then we drive, and however long it takes, obviously, if it's from Oulu, we won't get there until 9 o'clock at night. If it's from Kahani, it's 7 o'clock. So either way, on arrival, we get dinner, whichever lodge you're staying at usually, and it's usually just like a sandwich rather than a full-blown dinner. And there will be tea and coffee and things like that on offer as well. You'll get shown to your rooms, and on the first night, you get a really good night's sleep. And I can't stress that enough. One of the other things to say is that there is Wi-Fi at the lodges. So if that's an important issue for you, then that's covered. And that's the same in Slovenia as well, I should say. So anyway, I'm going to just quickly introduce a couple of the different options. So this is what the landscape's like: sprawling forests with water-filled openings in the middle, with meadows around those, either lakes or swampy areas or things like that. The forest is boreal forest, so it's part of the tiger forest that circumnavigates the globe, so to speak, goes all the way around it. And it's home to a wealth of wildlife, and I mean a wealth. In terms of predators, it's the best place in Europe, really. You've got lynx, wolverine, grey wolf, brown bear. You know, it is predator heaven. In terms of lynx, I really doubt you'll see them. Most of the people I know in Finland, and I know them pretty well, rarely see them, and they spend pretty much every day in the forest. So it gives you an idea of how elusive they are. But bears are reliable, and there's now a new option as well, which is this luxury option. So typically in Finland, you stay overnight in hides, and that sounds probably pretty scary, but actually they're very comfortable. But these ones have taken it to a whole nother level. So these are basically luxury cabins with beautiful large windows, and the bears come to you, so you don't have to leave your room. You can spend a lovely relaxing night watching the bears, and then when you want to go to bed, you can just go to bed. They've got little kitchenettes in the back, so they're very comfortable. There's loads and loads of opportunities to watch bears, but you can sort of do it in luxury, so to speak. But the typical bear watching experience is you go to somewhere like Martin Selkonen or Boreal Wildlife Centre, and you'll go in a hide such as this, or a smaller 1 or 2 person hide, which are more sort of catered to hardcore photographers. And these hides have everything you need. So they typically have tea and coffee making facilities. You can take food into the hide with you. There are beds, there's a toilet. So there is everything you really need. And depending on which lodge you're staying at, they all look a little bit different, but the sort of wildlife photography and viewing opportunities are really exceptional. So these are dedicated bear watching lodges, I would say. So this is a typical view at Martin Selkonen, for example. This was actually one of the first photographs I took. This is a mother that actually had 4 mature cubs. And I would say if you're really interested in bear cubs in particular, if you go in July, and you go to Martin Selkonen, it really is hard to beat. There are numerous bears that appear each day. Again, they are fed, but it's under license. And again, it's crucial that these bears actually get the tourism numbers, because it means that they're protected in the areas where the lodges are. And actually, the lodges are right on the Russian border. And the benefit is that there's a no man's land between Finland and Russia. And this is basically a great wildlife reserve, because no hunters go into those zones. So bears, wolves, wolverines, you name it, lynx, are all protected in that area. So they come across the border to feed, and then they go back into no man's land to stay safe. So it's a great place. And as I said, the wildlife here, sort of the bear sightings, are very much focused, I would say, primarily around females with young cubs and the large males that accompany them. Typically, you don't see any sort of middle-aged bears or younger bears that don't have cubs or middle-aged males. And you do not need big lenses here. I mean, this was taken, I think, at 70mm, something like that, to give you an idea, right in front of the hide, 2 bear cubs. And I wish I could play you video. We've had a few issues with videos on Zoom, so I haven't included any, but you can watch them climb up and down trees, play with each other, and it really is just, it's so special. And from a photography point of view, obviously, it's fantastic. So you really can't ask for more. What I would say in Finland is it's the way it works with the timings is very different from Slovenia. So whereas Slovenia, you have 4 hours in the hide in the evening, and you go back and you have dinner, and then you have a lovely night's sleep, and then you get up in the morning and you go out looking for wildlife in the morning. Finland is very different. So on that first night, you get a good night's sleep. That's really important. You'll then wake up first thing in the morning, and there'll be an amazing cooked breakfast on offer. Then on the first day, there's usually an opportunity to go out and explore the forest, and you can find out about bear behavior, see some local bird life. It's a great place for things like Siberian jay. If you're really lucky, Ural, great grey owls, if there's a good vole count. Woodpeckers as well, all over the place, fantastic. Fly catchers, red flank bluetail, even if you're really lucky. So it's a really great place for birding around during the day. And then what happens is you normally have your dinner at about 2 p.m, typically, something like that. So it's a late lunch. And what you do is you have a proper cooked meal. It will be a typical Finnish meal. They can cater for vegetarians and gluten-free if necessary, so that's not a problem. And what happens is you then, after you've had your dinner, you make yourself a little sandwich. And you can also buy little provisions, usually from a small sort of tuck shop. But you then take that with you into the hides. So you take food and you can take drink and stuff like that with you into the hides. So you typically get to the hides at about 4, 5 p.m, something like that. And you will stay in those hides until 7 to 8 in the morning. And that sounds crazy. I know it does. But I promise you, some nights it goes so quickly, you really don't know where the time has gone. And then what happens is you go back in the morning and you have a full cooked breakfast, which is practically your dinner. And then what I say you do is you go to sleep and you get a really good night's sleep, and then you do it all again. And it's fantastic. It's great. I love it. And don't think of it as a holiday to catch up on some sleep. Think of it as a holiday that you'll never forget, because it really is quite remarkable. And the bear sightings are world class. I mean, you really can see some amazing sightings. And even as you're walking to the hides in Finland, it isn't unheard of to have a bear walking in front of you or in the forest to one side. It's entirely possible. They're used to seeing people in those areas without sort of ever coming close to them. So they always keep their distance, but you can get some amazing sightings. In fact, I remember a trip I led quite a few years ago. One of my clients said, "Do you think we're going to see bears?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm sure we will." And as she said that, I was climbing a slight rise on the footpath to the hide. And as I got to the top of the footpath, there was a fully grown male bear, maybe 20 yards in front of me. And I turned around to her and said, "Well, we're definitely going to see a bear." And she said, "Oh, how do you know that?" And of course, she came up and the bear was right in front of her. So you never know when there are bears around. They could literally be anywhere. But it really is a great place, Martin Selkinen, and again, Boreal Wildlife Centre. And if you're really lucky, when you're driving around the forest, you might even see an elk, or a moose, as they're called in the USA and Canada. But in Europe, they're called elk. And this is a female, obviously, but you can see males as well. And it's typically dusk is a really good time to see them. But dusk at this time of year, because we are in the sort of far northern reaches of Europe in midsummer, dusk is at 11:30 p.m. and dawn is at 1:30 a.m. So dusk is pretty late on, so it's pretty unusual to be driving. But if it's a really gloomy, overcast day, don't be disheartened, because it's a great time to see elk. So if you go for a little drive around, you never know what you might see. So I'm going to focus on my favorite place in Finland for the rest of this talk, and that's a place called Quika Base Camp. It's a family-owned operation. It's a former Finnish border post, so it's actually an ex-military post for border patrols, and it has everything you need. If you're interested in saunas, it has a sauna, it has fantastic Wi-Fi, it has comfortable beds. I would say it's more rustic than the other options in Finland, but this place is all about the wildlife sightings. So if you're interested in your wildlife first and foremost, this is the place to come, because it's not just about bears, although bears are a big draw. The owners are fantastic. It started by a wonderful man called Lassi Rautanen, a very well-respected photographer, and his son also helps out. And Lassi's partner as well is also part of the team. They're so friendly, wonderfully kind, will do anything they can for you. They trust me implicitly, which helps you really can't sort of thank them enough, because they'll let me drive the vehicles and things like that. So, we can dictate our own timetable and things like that. And that makes such a big difference. And we can even ask where we can go at particular times. There are different locations for different hides. And that's really important too. It's sat on a beautiful lake, and the lake is home to divers, beaver, all sorts of different things, goldeneye, all around the lake, hundreds and hundreds of nest boxes that are home to different species of owls, woodpecker, flycatchers, you name it, they're all here. It's a fantastic place. I do need to be honest, mosquitoes in Finland in the summer can be a problem. So make sure you wear insect repellent. In Slovenia, I've never really had an issue, but in Finland, it is really important to know that they can be bad. There are peaks and troughs, and you never know when those peaks and troughs are. So when the snows melt, you get a sudden emergence of mosquitoes. They mate, they then lay their eggs. A lot of them will die. Then what happens is you get a bit of a trough, and hopefully that's when we have outdoor, and then you'll get these fluctuations as the population sort of booms and busts, so to speak. So it is something to be aware of. But for the most part, you're in the hides, and we shut them behind us, and they're pretty well sealed, so you don't need to worry too much. But do take insect repellent, and then some of the hides they will have burners as well with insect coils. So the hides typically here are smaller than at Martin, Selton and Boreal, although those places do have the small 1 and 2 man hides. At Quika, they're typically between 2 and 4 people in a hide. They do have a toilet at the back, which is important. They're composting toilets, but they are perfectly functioning and do the job very well. Again, you take your food into the hide at night, that's not a problem. The bears can come incredibly close. I mean, I've literally filmed them scratching themselves on a hide with my clients in before, and had some pretty amazing text messages, because you get full 4G phone signal, of course, in the forest here, as you do in the remotest part of Finland. And yeah, it's fantastic. The bear photography here is exceptional. The lighting here can be exceptional. There is one larger hide as well. So if you, on the first night, typically we go to this larger hide. It's very comfortable, got proper bunk beds in the back of it, a proper toilet, even a place to hang your coats and things like that. So, you know, you can be very, very comfortable in this hide, but the smaller hides always have somewhere to sleep. If it's a 2-man hide, typically it's sort of a nice padded floor area you can sleep on. Or if it's a 3-man hide, there are bunks at the back and little storage areas and places you can put your bags. And as you can see, you can actually mount your tripod heads in the hides, and that's the same in Slovenia. So if you would prefer to have a tripod head to mount your lens on, or your camera, you can, or you can use a bean bag, or you can just point and shoot through the camera ports. And obviously you've got the windows at the top, so with binoculars you've got fantastic visibility. So the bear photography here, for the most part, you're pretty low down, so you can get some great shots of them, including in front of a beautiful pond, where you can also get goldeneye, wagtails. This hide is also great because you get other species of mammal come in, which I'll speak to you about later. But the lighting as well here is remarkable. So by going from 5 p.m. all the way through to dawn, you get sunset all the way through to dusk. You get like 2 hours of dusk, and then it will be sunrise into the morning. So you get this beautiful changing light from all different sides. It never gets completely dark, so you literally can see all the time, and there can be activity sometimes from when you first arrive all the way through to the morning. Some days are quiet, well, nights are quieter than others. Some are non-stop frenetic action. I had a client on the last time I ran the trip, which was 2019, because obviously last year we couldn't travel. We had a client who was desperate to see wolves, had never seen a wolf, and said, will I see wolves? And literally as we got in the hide, I was still outside. I hadn't even got into the hide, and I had to run in and say, you aren't going to believe this, but there's actually a wolf out the front. So you really don't know what's going to happen at any time. So this is really exceptional. Beautiful cotton grass. And if you're wondering what sunrise looks like at 1:30 in the morning in the forest, this is it. I mean, you really can't ask for more than that. As well as the bears, you get different birds, lots of ravens, wagtails, white-tailed eagles, black kites, even black grouse lecking sometimes if they're sort of a bit slow on the uptake. All sorts of things are here. It's a fantastic place to be. And that lighting, always changing, just provides you with countless photography opportunities, whether you're in the meadows or you're in the more forested areas. And as I said, they do put food out here. It's a bit different from Slovenia. They are allowed to put meat out, not all the time, but sometimes, and fish scraps. So this was actually a reindeer roadkill, not a wild reindeer, I should say, but this was a domestic reindeer that was killed, unfortunately, on the road. And so we actually were able to use this as food for the bears and the other wildlife. And it gives you an idea. I mean, that's a full-grown reindeer, and that's the size of a full-grown male bear. So they are pretty sizable. They're much bigger than the bears in Slovenia. That's a really important thing to say. But as you can see, the landscape here is stunning. It's completely different from Slovenia. You've got the traditional boreal pine forests, these coniferous forests, and the meadows in between, which are filled with wildflowers and cotton grass. And the bears will walk across the meadows and through the swamps and through the forest. And when the light's magical, I mean, you can't beat it. Some nights, I mean, Finland's weather in the summer can be drastically bizarre. I mean, sometimes I've had -2, -3 at night, so you need to wrap up really warm. I quite often just take a sleeping bag with me to sit in, much more comfortable. And I know other times in hides where it can be 35 degrees and people are quite literally sat in t-shirt and shorts. So there really can be all sorts going on weather-wise, but that all adds to the fun of it. And the bear photography won't ever compromise. But as the light starts to fade, the bears usually start to disappear a little bit. And then if you're really lucky, you might start to see some of the rarer sort of species that call this forest home. And for me, seeing a grey wolf in the wild was a dream, and it only came true once I came to Finland. And this was the first wolf I ever saw. Unfortunately, she's passed away, but only because of old age. She was about 14 when she died. I think she's probably the most photographed wolf in Europe, but she was brilliant. And I kept seeing this tree stump for hours and hours and hours in this hide. And I thought to myself, no, it's a tree stump again. And I thought, oh, it's got to be a wolf. No, it's a tree stump again. And I must have done this 15 times in the course of 2-3 hours. It's the same tree stump. I was adamant was a wolf. Anyway, as the sun just set behind the trees and a sort of a light mist settled over the pond in front of me, I saw this white patch on the edge of the forest, and I thought, it's just the same tree stump again that I keep seeing. And then it moved, and it happened to be the wolf was next to the tree stump, and she walked out into this sort of open forest in front of me, and she just proceeded to walk towards me, and the light changed, because the mist disappeared, and it was possibly one of the most incredible wildlife encounters I've ever had, because I was in this hide and she walked straight at me, and she knew I was there. There was no denying that. And the bears will know you're there as well, but when you keep your voices down, they're very comfortable. But this wolf just kept on walking towards me until she came and stopped on the opposite side of the pond, this small lake, and just stared at me. And genuinely, just talking about it now, I have complete pins and needles. It was remarkable. It's unlike anything else. And then her mate came and joined her. I mean, you really can't ask for more. It is a true privilege. And as the light starts to fade, obviously it becomes more and more difficult to photograph. So I sort of started to pan with them moving through the trees, and there's so many different photographic opportunities if that's what you're interested in. But if you just want to see the wildlife, you can do it on a tailor-made basis, or you can just join the tour with myself. You don't have to be a photographer. You know, anybody's welcome. It's just an amazing experience to be in the forest. And if you're lucky, the wolves, like I said, can come out when it's broad daylight, and you can just photograph to your heart's content. And then as the sun sets again, you can get more and more amazing photography opportunities. And sometimes the wolves will come straight in front of you and just watch you, and it is breathtaking. Not only that, the bears and the wolves will also sometimes interact. And we've had before 9 different wolves in front of the hide with 5 different bears. So you never really know. And in the past, there was actually a male bear and a male wolf, a lone wolf, that formed a partnership for a summer. They formed a coalition and they ruled the roost. The wolves are top dogs. They chase everything off, particularly because they're in numbers, so they can gang up on the bears. But the bears, if there's one wolf, will fight them off and sort of defend themselves. When I say fight, they'll just chase them. They don't ever actually fight. The wolves are far too smart and quick for that. But then it's really fascinating to watch that behavior and see how they interact, and seeing them in this beautiful landscape again with the wildflowers, the cotton grass, the trees, is really special. You really can't ask for more than that. And there's one more mammal that you get in these forests, and it's the wolverine. And these guys are bonkers. I mean, if anybody has seen a wolverine, they'll know what I'm talking about. But think of a badger that's on steroids. It's pretty big, but it also suffers from severe ADHD. They do not stay still, and they are so hard to photograph. So whether you've got a 500 mil, a 300 mil, or whatever with wolverines, it doesn't really matter because they're so hard to capture. You've just got to keep trying. With the bears, a range of lenses is great. Something more wide angle, something like a 500 mil. Same with the wolves. 500 mil is fantastic. 600 if you really want that extra reach. But a 300, particularly in the low light, is really good for the wolverines because you can get usually a slightly wider aperture, f2.8 or f4, something like that. Even a 100 to 400 is actually probably fine because of the wider sort of field of view you get. You can probably let a tiny bit more light in. But they're a nightmare to photograph, but they are the most characterful things. And these things are insane. They will take on wolves, they will take on bears, and they are tiny in comparison. And actually one of these wolverines, I think it's actually this one. No, it's not this one, it's a different one, sorry. Actually got scalped a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now. And they thought it must die because it got into a fight with a bear, and the bear basically scalped it. And they thought there was no chance it could survive. Anyway, the next year it turns up and it's got an almighty scar on its head, but it's absolutely fine. So they're as tough as nails, but really, really hardcore little things. So yeah, there's an amazing amount of wildlife on offer. Obviously, the bears are the primary focus of these trips. But what I would say is that go with an open mind because whatever you see is going to be fantastic. Whether it's the bear, the wolf, the wolverine, Ural owls, or even white storks, you name it. There's so much on offer in Slovenia or in Finland. And if you want to go bear watching in Europe, I can think of no two finer places. There are other places, but for me, these two are the standout destinations in Europe, and I can't recommend them enough. As Dan said, I wouldn't stop going on about them, so he had to go. So yeah, just go. It's amazing. Enjoy the wildlife. And if you have any questions and you haven't already sent them over, please do send them over now. I know Dan's going to run a poll as well, which will ask you a question about what you're interested in. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, you can always send me an email. My email address is on screen there, bretc@wildlifeworldwide.com, or you can go through the website and contact us. And if you would really like to, you can order one of our fantastic brochures as well. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that answers a lot of your questions anyway, but if not, please send us your questions and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
Bret, that was outstanding, Bret. Brought back some really fond memories for me. What a superb talk. And I have to say, you are an exceptional photographer. You're a very good naturalist, but a very, very decent photographer. And I know you make a superb leader. So yeah, a little bit of praise, but we'll move on from that. I do, as you suggested, have a few questions for you. They've been rolling in, lots of questions. I've managed to answer a few, just to lighten the load for you, but there was a few that were a little bit beyond me.
Yeah.
Ron has asked, is there a typical kind of exposure and ISO setting that you would kind of recommend, or is it just so varied?
It's so varied. I mean, particularly when you're in foresty sort of habitats with changing light, you've got to really adjust it pretty much every time you take a photograph, to be honest. But with telephoto lenses, the hardest thing is light. I mean, it always is. To try and get enough light, you can never have enough. It's always a pain. Well, actually, midday, you don't ever want to photograph at midday. It's too bright then. We'll always complain, photographers, we're a nightmare. There's never enough light or there's too much. But anyway, so typically what I'd say is start at an aperture where you can get some depth. So it doesn't have to be wide open. And then you want an ISO that just allows you to get the speed you want. So if you've got a 500mm lens, you typically want a shutter speed of over 500th of a second. So you just need to adjust your aperture and your ISO to ensure you get that, basically. That's the easiest way to do it. But if you have techie questions, I can answer them. So
okay. Thanks, Bret. And also, Ron has asked, are bean bags available at the two locations?
Yeah, typically they are. And if someone has, so some people have their own bean bags that they really like. For example, they're they've used them for years, so they're really confident with them. I know that sounds weird, but it is a thing. If you take them, they'll quite often help you fill them up and things like that. But yeah, typically there are bean bags on offer in the hides, so that's not normally a problem.
And would you take a tripod personally? I know you mentioned it earlier that there is the option, but is that something you travel with?
For Slovenia, I quite often take one because of the fact you can go for wanders and you can sort of do some nice meadow sort of photography and stuff like that if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Or when we're seeing some of the landscapes, that's really nice. In the hide, you don't need to, but you always need to take a tripod head, is my best suggestion. So most tripod heads will just screw off your tripod. So they're a separate entity. You buy a tripod and then you buy a tripod head. If you take your tripod head with you, they basically have these little plates with screws in that are the right size, and you can just screw it on. And then it means that your tripod head is exactly the right height for the portholes, and it means it's really stable, so you don't have to worry about it falling off, or it's all really nice and secure. If you're not using an SLR, then I'd say a beanbag's more than enough, to be honest. It's only really for the SLRs you need these tripod heads. But because you're in the hide all night, you don't really need the tripod during the day in Slovenia, to be honest. There's not really any landscape opportunities or anything like that. So it's not such an issue, but that tripod head is really, really key.
Okay, no, that's really handy.
Anyway.
And would you use flash photography at all, Bret, or
No,
is that a no-no? Yeah.
No, big no-no. The bears are relatively, I would say, tolerant of our presence, but they are nervous of light, particularly like if they see flashing lights, then they'll instantly sort of be nervous and shy away. And also, as the light levels start to fade, you're affecting their eyesight. A bit like when we're flashed at a party and everybody sort of looks all startled. It's the same thing for them. So for me, it's a big no-no. With wolverines and wolves, like absolutely not. They're just too, they're too quick as well. As much as anything, they'll move around. If a flash goes off, they'll just jump off in the other direction, and then you won't see them for an hour, and then they'll come back again. So the best thing to do is, what I normally say is, when you're photographing these things, is take 1 or 2 shots. And then just give it a little bit of a break, see how they react, and then if they look completely relaxed, then you can kind of keep taking loads of photographs. But if they start to look a bit startled, just take it slowly, and don't use flash.
As you can see, guys, we have got the poll running at the moment, and we've got the 5 trips featured there. At the top there, we've got the Finland boreal predators photography trip, which is one which Bret has led for the last few years. We are also starting to work with a couple of other leaders. And I think, is that 5 nights, Bret? 5 or 6 nights?
Yeah, it's 5 nights, 6 days. So 4 nights hides.
Yeah, and all at Kika, isn't it? All at Kika.
Yeah, all at Kika, yeah. So where you can see wolf, bear and wolverine.
Yeah, super. And then beneath that, we've got the self-drive. That combines whatever hide you want, really. So you can do a combination of Martin Selkonen, boreal or Kika. And if you're up for self-driving, you really just need to speak to either Bret or myself. And if you let us know what your targets are and your time of year when you're hoping to travel, then we can put together an itinerary that will work perfectly for you, really. I did, when I did my trip with my wife a couple of years back, we did all 3 bear watching destinations, and they all offer something different, don't they, Bret? I mean, if you want nailed on bears and lots of bears, Martin Selkonen. If you want a chance of bears and wolverine, and in probably the most comfortable hides, in my opinion, than boreal. Or if you just want a fantastic chance, if you're feeling greedy, you want bears, wolves and wolverine, then Kika, and you don't mind it. It's nuts, to see those 3 species on one night. I didn't believe you when you used to tell me about this. I used to get the text messages from you. You were in the hide and saying, look what I've just seen, and it's just remarkable. It is a fabulous place. Anyway, I digress. Finland's brown bears in style, that is, as Bret said, that's a tailor-made option to a very comfortable bear watching location, where you have both the option of the comfortable chalets where you can watch the bears from there, or indeed you can go in the smaller hides. And then we have the 3 Slovenia options. The Slovenia bears in Lake Bled, where, as it suggests, you split your time between the bear watching and Lake Bled, which, as you saw earlier, is absolutely stunning. This is what Danny and I did last September. A fabulous trip and a beautiful hotel on Lake Bled. And then we have the spring photography trip, and then the autumn photography trip, again, usually led by Bret or perhaps Emma or maybe Sean. But those are both super trips. And on the group side of things, Bret, how does that usually work? Obviously, we'll have a group size of what, 4 to 8, something like that, perhaps? Yeah,
typically it's between 4 and maximum is 8. I don't take groups bigger than that usually. So what happens is, if you're a couple, typically you'll go in a 2-man hide, or if you want to go with me, we'll go in a 3-man hide, 3-person hide. And then what happens is, over the course of the trip, we will rotate. So I will always try and make sure I go with every member of the group in a hide at some point if they want to. Obviously, not everyone wants to. But if you do want to, then you have to put up with me for a few hours. So yeah, I'll always make sure we do that, and we'll basically rotate people in different hides, different locations. As I said, in some places like Quika, at Paradise, they call it. It's a mistranslation, but it's a great name for it. There's a big hide there which will take our entire group in one go, so that's really helpful.
Sure.
But quite often we'll split it up into different hides, because it sounds weird, but it's quite nice having it as your, although other people might be seeing it, it feels like it's your own private sighting, and that's quite cool.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I would say on those smaller hides that you want to be in one of the smaller hides with somebody that you're comfortable with as well.
Oh yeah.
There's it's a relatively confined space, and you're going to be in there for a while. So if you've got a travel companion or something like that, so much the better. But no, it is brilliant. This is a really a bit of a cheesy question, which has come in, and it just relates to your favorite sighting in both Finland and Slovenia. I'm going to put you on the spot here with this. Any thoughts?
Typically for Finland, I'm going to have to say it's a wolf and not a bear, which is terrible. Just because that white wolf was so magical, like coming out of the forest, she was sort of like a ghost that just appeared, and I don't know, it just seemed to be that intimacy. It sounds stupid, but it seemed like we were staring through each other's souls. I can't even begin to, when a wolf is staring at you and you can tell it's staring at you, that's, I don't know, it's...
Was that the sighting you had when she started howling, or was that another one?
No, that's a different night. That howling was bonkers as well. That's probably my second best sighting in Finland. So yeah, a whole pack of wolves started to howl for probably 45 minutes. And I filmed it. I've got some footage. If you ever go to my Instagram, if anybody's on Instagram, it's on there. Again, because videos don't work so well on here, I didn't show it, otherwise I would have done. And then in Finland, actually, this bear here, in Slovenia, just a beautiful bear. And as you can see, the light was amazing and just really comfortable with us. And I was with a client who I don't know whether she's on here tonight, but it felt like we had that bear for like an hour and a half. And then when I next saw her, which was I think 2 years ago, she said to me, "You do realize we only actually saw that bear for about 9 minutes, but it seemed like a lifetime." It was just the most, I don't know, amazing, again, intimate sort of sighting. And that for me is what it's all about, is having that, I don't know, there's that romance side, I suppose, of a wildlife.
Absolutely. It's actually been able to sit there and just to watch an animal completely undisturbed, isn't it? And observe that behavior. And it's very, very special. And, you know, people think that kind of bear watching is bear watching, but it's not. That the experiences in the two locations couldn't be more contrasting, could they, really? It's nuts.
You can't compare the two. It's a completely different world. And I think even like the sounds, you know, so like in Finland, you get the call of the ravens and stuff like that, sort of calling through the forest. Whereas in Slovenia, it's all about the cuckoos and the owls and, you know, the jays and stuff, all calling throughout the forest. It's a completely different world, really. And then, whereas in Finland, I'd say the bears kind of quite nonchalantly stroll out, you know, all arrogant, and I'm the big, you know, boss in town. The bears in Slovenia sort of just appear out of the forest suddenly. And you wouldn't, you know, if you dropped your gaze for a minute and you're looking down, you would never have even know it's there. It could have just spent 10 minutes in front of you and you would have had no idea. So it is very different, but that makes it equally as rewarding, and why I don't stop going back.
I'd agree. It's kind of quality over quantity, isn't it, with Slovenia? That you can almost trip over bears in Finland on occasions, whereas Slovenia, they are a lot more skittish, but they are in the most beautiful settings. And it's a brilliant place, and it's just a lovely country. I mean, they're both lovely, but Slovenia in particular is fabulous. I think we're almost getting there with the questions, Bret. I can see that a few others have rolled in. We do just have one more, just with regard to seasonality for the two. When does the season start, finish? What would you suggest there, please?
So Slovenia, I'll do it Slovenia first. So Slovenia, I would say basically mid-May, so sort of 15th of May onwards, through till, I would say, mid-June, probably end of June. I would say mid-June is better, personally. So mid-May through to mid-June is sort of like peak bare and sort of beautiful forest season. It's when the forest is all coming to life. It's full of breeding birds, and it's just a wonderful place and wonderful time to go. The daytime temperatures usually are between 15 and 25 degrees, so it's quite comfortable. It's quite nice. And then I would say mid-August through to mid-October. Obviously, the later you go, the less daylight you have, but then you get more colours. So you get different the forest changes from greens to golden sort of yellows and browns and stuff. So so that's sort of the time there. With Finland, it's a little bit different. So I mean, it's really different. You can go at all sorts of different times. So typically for the sort of stuff we do, we either go from midsummer's evening basically through till August. Is sort of peak summer activity. If you're really lucky, you might see like wolf cubs and stuff if you're at Quika at that time, because that's when they're starting to move around, and the wolf pack there are pretty habituated, well, relatively speaking. But for bears, any time really from April when there's still snow, all the way through till end of September. And end of September is a fantastic time to go for golden light. So instead of staying in the hides overnight in Finland at that time, you actually change. So Quika, for example, you would actually go in the hide from mid-afternoon until it's dark, and it gets dark at 8 o'clock, something like that, 9 o'clock. So yeah, it changes. But yeah, so literally from Finland, you can go, if you're doing bears, June through till August. If you want bears, wolves, wolverines, any time from April through to October. So.
Brilliant. No, that's super. No, I think that's probably about it, Brett. I'm sure there's probably going to be some other questions that will come in due course, and obviously we'll go back to them tomorrow. You're around tomorrow, I'm around tomorrow, so we'll do our best to help with that. Before we wrap things up for the evening, I should just say that we have got an action-packed week in terms of talks. We really have. Tomorrow lunchtime, we've got Sarah Malcolm talking about the wildlife of the Pantanal. That's one of our in-depth talks, so that will be kicking off at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow evening, we have the fantastic Alex Hyde, one of our tour leaders, a superb macro photographer, talking about macro photography. That's tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. And then on Thursday, we have some further talks. We have Colombia with Robin Smith, our good friend and partner, Robin, who's based in Colombia. He'll be kicking off at 7:30 Thursday evening. And then on Friday, we have an in-depth talk, I think with yourself, Brett, don't we? At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we're back on Finland again. So we'll look at that. Yeah, the boreal predators trip in a bit more detail. So yeah, if you find yourselves at a loose end, do check in with us and be sure to have a listen. But with that, I think Brett and I will wrap things up and thank everybody for joining us tonight, and wish you a very good week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.